going to record this. There you go. I think you all have to say yes on the recording in progress. And what I will do is I will share the recording with you tomorrow, or since we're early morning class, I'll share the recording with you either later today or tomorrow morning. That way you can watch it, you can review it in just a little bit more detail. You can compare it to your handout. And then if you need anything when you're doing your homework, then you can go back and listen to that recording, especially as I start getting into the weeds, because this is a master class. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to get pretty deep and crazy into macro photography. Not so deep you won't be able to understand, but at the same time, you know, those of you who've taken my master classes know that it's just fun to go real deep into this, because it is assumed that you're ready for a little bit more complicated things. Okay, and then Lexi just came in. Welcome, Lexi. Everybody has your handout? Yes. Your handout? Okay, yes. Good. And by the way, there's a lot of stuff on the handout that I may not cover verbally. So if you see anything in there that I'm not specifically covering verbally that is of interest to you, then please stop me. But there's just kind of a lot of information in there. I'm going to assume that, and knowing many of you all, I'm going to assume you've at least dabbled in macro photography or tried a little bit of macro photography. Macro photography can be of anything or any subject, and it is officially classified as extreme close-up photography. But what I like to call macro photography is that we take small objects and we can make them bigger. So this little red-eyed tree frog is about 1.5 inches across. We can take this object and make him look bigger, and it brings him closer to people so that people can enjoy him. Little Texas crescent, very small butterfly that we have in the spring and the summertime. And we can take with macro photography and bring that up closer. We can take very small objects. This is a hummingbird breast feather. And I only know that because I saw it fall and then was able to find it. So that's the only reason that I know that this is a hummingbird feather. So we can take extremely small objects and we can make them bigger so that people can enjoy their structure and marvel at nature. We can do, you know, all kinds of interesting things with our macro photography. And it depends on really what you want to do and how you want to play what you can photograph with your macro photography. It can be objects you've got around you and in your house, or if you happen to enjoy doing things like industrial photography. I have a friend who does macro photography in junkyards because what she likes the most is rusted metal and rusted stuff. So macro photography can be anything that you want to photograph. And that's also what makes it kind of interesting, is that we can photograph almost anything we want with macro photography. So it makes it fun. So reproduction ratios, when we're talking about macro, reproduction ratios 1:1. So 1 with the colon and 1 simply means 1:1 life size. So if I took a piece of 35mm piece of film, and I'm sure all of you all know that, except maybe Lexi doesn't know what a 35mm piece of film is. But Lexi, that 35mm piece of film was what we used in cameras from the 50s all the way through the digital era. That 35mm piece of film is 1.5 inches. 35mm is 1.5 inches. So what 1:1 reproduction ratio means is if I photographed a penny with film and then laid the negative or the slide right on top of the penny, then the penny would be exactly the same size on the slide as it was in real life. So that's a 1:1 reproduction ratio. So it's exactly life size. But we can get what's called 1:2, which is half life size. And then we can get 2:1, which is 2 times life size. So this little blue jean tree frog in Costa Rica is anywhere from 1/4 of an inch long to 1/2 an inch long, depending on how big you find them. So we're dealing with something that's fairly small. So 2 to 1 life size would mean that I get to see them much, much bigger than life size, or 2 times life size. So those are what are called our reproduction ratios. Questions on that real quick? It's just kind of lingo. Okay. And you can photograph macro photography, or you do macro photography with any lens you own. You do not need a special lens. I get many people who say, I don't want to take your macro class yet because I don't own a macro lens. Well, you don't need to own a macro lens to do macro photography. These 2 owl eye butterflies that you see, you'll notice that one of them is photographed with a 300 millimeter lens. And the other one, same size on the piece on the digital image, the other one is photographed with a wide angle lens, the lens that we would use for landscape photography. The difference between the two is with the 300 millimeter lens, I have to get further back. With the 17 millimeter lens, I have to get closer. So you can photograph macro photography with any lens that you own. Special lenses are not needed. But, and then before I leave this one, you'll notice the background on the 300 millimeter shot looks a lot better. It's a lot purer and it's a lot cleaner. And that's known as the bokeh, that blurred out background back there. And so you do have certain advantages to using certain lenses. True macro lenses. I've given you a Nikon, Canon, Sigma, and Tamron on your handout. Your true macro lenses, these are the lenses that advertise a 1-to-1 reproduction ratio or a 1-to-2 reproduction ratio. But most of the time, these are advertising 1-to-1 reproduction ratios. That means the penny on the film is exactly the same size as the penny in real life. So a true macro lens gives you the ability to photograph something at life size. And if you'll notice on the handout, the Nikon 105 macro lens focuses to 1 foot to 12 inches. The Canon 105 macro lens focuses to 11.8 inches. And so most of these lenses focus to about 1 foot. And then your Sigma does the same thing. It focuses to 1 foot, and then the Tamron focuses to about 1 foot. What's so special about one of these lenses that has the true designation of a macro lens is that it does do 1-to-1 reproduction. You notice that you also get a beautiful clean background. Now, going back to basic photography, the further your background is from your subject, the more it's going to be blurred. So by positioning yourself so that your subject's got 8 to 10 feet from it, then you're going to be able to blur out the background. The Canon 85 millimeter RF for the new mirrorless cameras, it has a minimum focusing distance of 1.5 feet, but it is not life size. It is 1-to-2 life size. Tamron, when they brought out their 90 millimeter lens, and this is a really well constructed, nice lens. And you notice on the barrel, it says 1-to-1 reproduction. So it actually tells you that it's got a 1-to-1 reproduction ratio. And it focuses, once again, very, very short to 11.81 inches. But you notice that each one of these lenses focuses to 1 foot away. And what makes these lenses so special, the true macro lenses, what makes them so special is the grinding of the glass. The glass is ground so that it gives you edge-to-edge sharpness, so that it gives you a nice flat film plane. And you can see this on this Nautilus shell. There's no drop off on the edges of what's in focus and what's not in focus. And that is what makes a true macro lens so special? These were originally designed back in the 50s and the 60s for putting in a camera stand and photographing x-rays or works of art or documents, so that we got edge-to-edge sharpness all the way around the edges of it. So we didn't want any blurring along the edges. Then photographers found that this was really nice to use on faces, because at about 90 millimeters or 105 millimeters, we don't get any distortion in a human face. So they became really popular portrait lenses because the woman's face didn't bow out or bow in. So we got a nice true face photograph. And then nature photographers found that these were really good for nature photography as well. So these true macro lenses are specially designed, and they do have a specially ground glass on them to give us edge-to-edge sharpness along the way. Anybody have a true macro lens, one of the ones that I've been talking about? So Rhonda, you've got one. Which one do you have?
I have the Nikon.
The 105?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Marty?
I have the same.
Same. Christina? Same thing? Yeah, okay. Can't hear you, Christina, but I think you said you
Yeah, I have the Nikon.
the Nikon. Good. Okay, so these are once again very specialized lenses, really nice edge-to-edge sharpness. Before you run out and buy one, if you don't own one, I own one. I own an 85 millimeter RF macro lens. It was one of the first lenses that came out for the Canon mirrorless system. And it sits on a shelf because I find that I like doing macro photography with some of my other lenses instead of that one. And I let a friend borrow it recently because she was thinking about buying it. She brought it back and she said, no, I'd sit on the shelf as well with me. And so you can use other lenses. If you love them, on the other hand, then people absolutely love them. So they're good. They're well worth it. But, you know, whether you go out and buy one, I'd suggest you rent one first and see whether you really want one, and whether you're going to use it. So macro with other lenses, you can do macro with any lens that you own. So this is my 16 to 35 millimeter lens. It's you know what I would use for my landscape photography. So it's a 16 to 35 millimeter lens, has almost 180-degree field of view. And if you notice, it focuses to 11 inches. So remember that a macro lens will focus to 12 inches or 11.8 inches, where this wide angle lens focuses to 11 inches. So this lens actually focuses closer than what you would get with a macro lens. And it gets a wider field of view. This is the 24 to 105 millimeter lens. This is one of my favorite just walk around lenses. So if I were going to walk around Florence, Italy, or I were going to walk around, you know, in Spain or something like that, or if I were going to go to a birthday party or a family gathering, I would take my 24 to 105. And the 24 to 105 focuses to 17 inches, but because it has the 105 on it, then I can get fairly close. This is wild nutmeg down in Costa Rica. Nutmeg. And then the 50 millimeter lens, a fixed lens that a lot of people like. This one focuses to 18 inches. And it's what drives me crazy about this lens is I can't get close with it. I have to stay further away than I want to. And so it drives me nuts to use this lens because I just can't get close enough to my subjects as I'm used to with my 24 to 105. And then this is a 70 to 300 millimeter lens, nice for getting close because you don't have to get in the flower beds. You don't have to disturb the critters. But this is not the cheapest 70 to 300 millimeter that Canon made, but this is the mid-range, not the $150 lens, but the $300 lens. And it focuses to 4 feet. So you have to be 4 feet away from your subjects to be able to photograph them. So you can use almost any of your lenses to photograph macro. This is Canon 70 to 200. And with that 200 millimeter, it focuses to 3 something feet. And so once again, gives us a really nice close-up view. You'll notice with this lens as well, and Nikon makes these just the same as what Canon does. So Nikon, you all have the 70 to 200, either a 2.8 or an f4. And we've all got these either in the SLR range or in the mirrorless range. And these lenses are specially designed to give us that beautiful blown out background. So you notice that the blurry area in front of the bolt and the blurry area behind the bolt with this lens are just pure and silky and absolutely beautiful. So with this lens, whether it's a Canon or a Nikon, I really like it. And it does focus close. It's very small. So this one in the mirrorless range is for Canon is about so big. It's a very tiny lens. So it doesn't take up much space at all. So it's a nice light lens to play with and fun. So you see that we can focus close and we can do macro photography with this as well. But we can also do macro photography with our big lenses. So our 100 to 400s, we can do macro photography like a spider web. So we don't have to get right up to it and blow it around or make it wiggle. This is macro photography with a sunflower and an admiral, and it's done with the 100 to 400 millimeter lens. And then playing around with butterflies, this is a 300 millimeter f4 lens. We're not making, Canon hasn't made it yet for the mirrorless, but for your digital SLRs, it's made, Canon has it. And also with Nikon, you all have it, a 300 millimeter 300 millimeter f4. Beautiful thing about this lens is that it focuses to 4.92 feet, which means if I'm holding the camera in my hand, I can focus on my toes. So it's a close enough lens that I can focus on butterflies like this Texas crescent. I can focus on something on the ground. I can focus on dragonflies, butterflies. So this 300 millimeter f4, once again, Canon and Nikon both make it. We don't have it for the mirrorless yet, but we've got it for the digital SLRs. It has a beautiful pure background to it. And it has that close focusing capabilities. So for years, this is what I considered my macro lens, because I didn't have to get too close to the subject, but I got a beautiful background to it. And once again, could do butterflies, dragonflies, flowers, whatever I wanted to do with it. So it's a good lens. So the message here is that any lens you own can be a macro lens. What you have to figure out is how close each one of your lenses focuses. And then you have to see whether you like the background more or less, or whether it reproduces a good background for you. Lexi, you've got a one-piece unit, if I'm not mistaken, right? If you want to unmute and tell me yes or no, you can, or you can do it through chat, whichever one you want. So Lexi's camera, depending on where she focuses, also has a minimum focus distance for each one of those, since she's working with a one-piece unit. So the key with macro photography is to use your lenses that you own and then find out which one of them does the job for you and which one of them is the best one that you're looking for. This one is the 105. With the RF lens, done down in Costa Rica recently. And this one with the RF lens, it has a minimum focusing distance of 2.95 feet, which when you zoom out to 500 millimeters, if you're 2.5 feet away from your subject, then you've got a tremendous amount of magnification going on. So even though it's a telephoto lens, because it focuses so close, it gives you a fairly good amount of magnification. So it makes it good. And here's the same thing with the 100 to 500 RF and then putting an extender on it. I'm not sure. Okay, good. There we go. Putting an extender on it lets me get even closer. So then it works well as a butterfly macro photography lens. And then here it is again, the 70 to 200 RF, the new 70 to 200 that we have for the Nikon and the Canon mirrorless cameras. And once again, this thing focuses to 1.97 feet. So at 200 millimeters, I'm only 2 feet away from the subject at 200 millimeters. So it works as a really, really nice macro lens because I don't have to get so close to my subject and scare my subject away. This little frog is about 1 inch long with those beautiful little eyeballs. Yeah, it's got cool little eyes. So any lens you own can be a macro lens. You don't have to go out and you don't have to buy a special lens. You don't have to have special, a special lens. But then there are some gadgets we can add, which make it really fun. So let's talk about some gadgets that we can add to make your getting closer. Now, any questions on lenses before I leave those? Y'all good?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So if we want to get closer, so our lens lets us get so close, and we've already figured that out. But now if we want to go closer, we can add what are called extension tubes. Hollow tube has no glass in it whatsoever, doesn't cut down on the light. Or we can add what's called a close-up filter. So it's a very thick filter that you add to the front of the lens. So you screw it on the front of the lens. And once again, you can use it on any lens you want to, and you can use them on any camera you want to. So these allow you to get even closer. So this is a monarch egg. One day I was in the garden, this was during COVID, and I saw a monarch lay an egg on my milkweed. So I came in and told my husband about it, and he said, great, we'll write about it for the Houston Chronicle article next week. Well, that means I had to go out there and photograph that Dawn monarch egg, and I had to get a photograph that I knew you all would like and you all would be impressed by. So this sent me on this quest for photographing this silly little monarch egg. So this is a 24 to 105 millimeter lens, my basic old ordinary walk around lens. Each one of the camera manufacturers makes something similar to this. And then I added a close-up lens to the front of the camera, and I added an extension tube to the back of the camera. Now, what an extension tube, this tube allows me to do is if I put this tube between my camera and my lens, this halves the minimum focusing distance. So if your minimum focusing distance was 1 foot, you put this between your lens and your camera, and now your minimum focusing distance is a 1/2 foot. So now you're super close to your subject. This is a thick tube. If you use the smaller tube, then it would roughly say 1/4 of a distance. But what this is doing is pulling the lens away from the body of the camera, and this allows you to reduce your minimum focusing distance. Those of you still using digital SLR cameras, you can buy these. Either Nikon does not make them anymore, but you can use Kenko, Kenko. Canon makes them, and they make them as a 12 and a 24. So the 12 is a smaller one and the 24 is the thicker one. The thicker they are, the closer you can get to your subject. If you put the 12 and the 24 together, you get 36, which means you're virtually laying your camera lens inside the flower to photograph the interior of the flower, which is just cool as all get out. Okay. The filter, the close-up filter, you can use this on any lens you own. And so Lexi could buy it for her camera that just has a 1-piece unit, and she could screw this onto the front, and now she can get even closer. You buy these based on the filter size of your camera, of your lens, I'm sorry. So if your filter size is 77, then you would buy a 77 millimeter. If your filter size is 62, then you would buy a 62 millimeter. We'll get to those in just a second, but let me show it to you in action, okay? So here's the photograph with the 24 to 105, and here's the setup. So here's the extension tube right down here, the 12 millimeter extension tube or the 24 millimeter extension tube. Behind the lens hood is this little guy right here. So I'm stacking them together along with the 24 to 105 millimeter lens. And you can see that this is a 24 to 105 millimeter lens. And then I've got, flash over here. I've got an artificial background. You're going to find that you love artificial backgrounds in macro work. And what the artificial background is nothing special. It is a blurry photograph that I have printed on my home printer. Don't worry about the quality of it, of printing. It just runs out like a document would run out on my little desktop printer. So when I take those blurry photographs, I just label them background and I save them and I use them when I need them. And the nice thing about nature is that these are usually colors that are fairly well in harmony with nature. So I use them for hummingbird backgrounds. I use them for macro backgrounds, and I just print them off and, throw them in a stack. And then I've got backgrounds for my macro photography or for my hummingbird photography when I need it. The hummingbird backgrounds are obviously bigger. So here's the same thing, the same setup with the Prometheus moth cocoon. I found this one day and it's about not so big. Has a beautiful Prometheus moth that has come out of the top of it, but the cocoon's left. Same setup, just using a 24 to 105 millimeter lens with a close-up filter on the front and an extension tube on the back, letting me get, once again, about so far away from my subject. So letting me get fairly close to my subject. Here's the setup on using the Prometheus moth. I'm using these clamps, which we'll talk about eventually, to hold up my background. And then I'm, using my flashes to light it up. And then you see it on the back of the camera. So it's got an extension tube on the back and a close-up filter on the front. And Sarah, since I know you have cats, yes, the cat was all over this. Yeah, the cat was right in the middle of it the entire time I was trying to photograph it. Yeah.
I can well imagine.
Yes. Yeah, he had to see it. And you notice I'm real high tech here. I've got a water bottle holding a clamp, so I'm just the most high tech person you can use. Got a piece of duct tape on my flash because it fell one time. So yeah, I'm massively high tech here. So the extension tubes come in the 12s or the 25s, or in the Kenko, Kenko, you can buy them in a set of 3, 12, 25, and 36. In Canon, they come in 12 and 25. Nikon stopped making them years ago. And we don't have them yet for mirrorless, by the way. So I don't use extension tubes anymore because I don't have them on my new mirrorless cameras. And then here's the close-up filter right here so that you can see it. And on page 2 of your handout, I've given you several of the other names. So these go by close-up diopter, close-up lens, even though it's not a lens, it's a filter, or close-up filter. Canon makes a 500D, a 750D, and a 250D. Nikon used to make a 4T, 5T, and 6T. Now, it doesn't matter whether you use Nikon on Nikon lens or Canon on Canon lens, because these screw onto the front of your lens. So if you're a Nikon user and you can find a Canon close-up filter, then buy it. You can also buy Morami or these other ones. And I give you these options because Nikon doesn't make these anymore, but there are used ones on eBay. And on Nikon, buy the 5T. Don't buy the 6T or the 4T. The 6T is too powerful. The 4T is not powerful enough. So if you're a Nikon user, or if anybody, and if you can find a Nikon 5T for the thread size of your filter, of your lens, then buy it. Once again, they're not made anymore by Nikon, but people are selling them because they bought them one time. They never really found a use for it and they're selling it. So they're out there and they're for sale on eBay. Canon, this 500D, the Canon factory that made the close-up filters was destroyed during the tsunami in Japan several years ago. But somebody has a bunch of these and they're selling them on eBay. Lynette, you bought one, didn't you? Yeah, yeah. So Lynette found them. Yeah, you're muted, Lynette, so I didn't hear whatever you just said. Yeah.
Yes, I bought one on eBay
Yeah.
and it was it was new.
Yeah, it was brand new. It was in the original packaging.
Yep.
Susan, you raised your hand?
I like
Yeah.
using it.
Yeah.
Yes, I have a Nisi diopter that I like very much. I put a note about it in the chat, and I was going to say something else. Oh, well, I'll think of it later. Yeah,
And
I mean, I've used it very successfully, and it makes beautiful little picture, beautiful close-ups.
okay, good.
And I know
Nisi.
the reason I like to use it is that it works also with my bridge camera, my RX10, my Sony RX10, which is a smaller diameter lens, but I use a step down ring for it. So I have one diopter, but I use it with all of my cameras.
Good. Very good. Very good. Now, this is one that I don't know about, so thanks for sharing that with me. When we had trouble getting the Canons and the Nikons, then that's when I tested the Mirami, and I can't see any difference at all between them. And the good thing about these little close-up lenses that you screw on in the good quality, remember, this is a thick lens and it's weighs a substantial amount, is that it has edge-to-edge sharpness. So if you use something cheap like the Vivitar close-up macro lens, all the edges of it are fuzzy and you're never going to get those edges nice and sharp. So Susan, on yours, the edges are nice and sharp?
I'd have to look back at my pictures.
Okay.
I can't make a I can't make a guarantee for that, but
Okay.
I like the pictures. So
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Yeah. So the neat thing about these, the thick ones, is that we've got edge to edge sharpness all the way across. And that's what makes it really fun. So we can put, if you can take your lens off, an extension tube on the back, a close-up filter on the front, and now we're super, super close to our subject. And this is how I've always used my macro lenses, because my macro lenses never really got me as close as I wanted to be. So I always ended up throwing an extension tube on the back and a close-up filter on the front. With my mirrorless camera, I'm throwing the close-up filter on the front and using them that way. When I see people put an extension tube on the back and a close-up filter on the front of their lens, it all depends on how close you are to your subject. So you have to go in and out and you have to find the focus distance. And when people find the focus distance, I usually hear, because the view is so beautiful. So that's when I always know that people have found the focus distance. So the key to using these is you have to be really patient and find where the lens focuses. And if you zoom, you put this on, say, a 70 to 200 millimeter lens or a 100 to 400 or 500 millimeter lens. When you zoom, your minimum focusing distance is going to change as well. And so then, it takes a little bit of practice and playing with it. And that's one of the reasons that people will sell these things once they buy them, is because they never took the time to figure out where the focusing distance was. But once you find it, you won't really forget it once you find it. So once you get used to using this, it's pretty easy to do. Then you kind of immediately figure out what your minimum focusing distance is, and then you're ready to go. Questions on those? Yeah, go ahead, Rhonda.
Are you manually focusing?
You can autofocus, but many times, just because your depth of field is so narrow, you are manually focusing.
So you want to be sure and set that on your lens, right?
Yes.
Manually focusing. Okay.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So, it takes a little bit of practice. And also, when you're so close as this is, you're almost always on a tripod as well.
Okay.
Yeah. So, you're just getting super, super close. So for instance, this is a javelina flower, 300 millimeter lens with a javelina flower, and I have the extension tube on it so that I can get just a little bit closer, put the close-up filter on the front, and now that's what you get.
Wow.
So this is a 300 millimeter lens with the extension tube on the back and the close-up filter on the front, and now we get that type of thing. And then playing around with this is my 16-35 super wide angle lens. I would use this for landscape photography, night photography. This is your big wide angle lens. Focuses to 11 inches. So if I get close out in the garden, then I still get a really nice wide angle shot as opposed to a narrowed down shot. So it focuses to 11 inches. Add a close-up filter, and now I can get even closer to it. But that, of course, minimizes my depth of field as I get closer. And so now I can get a little bit more kind of hazy things. And then this is with the extension tube. So we can even do extension tubes on our wide angle lenses as well, depending on the lens and depending on how the lens is structured. So any one of these can work with a wide angle lens. It doesn't have to just be your telephoto lenses. And then here's the interior of a gladiola, interior of a magnolia. I love the interiors of magnolias. They're so much fun to, you know, clip that bloom, bring it inside and just photograph it like crazy. But you see how we got haziness going all the way around on it. Here's another moth larvae that I found in the leaf litter, and photographing that once again, just getting really close with the extension tubes and the close-up filters. So here on the 24-105, you see the close-up filter is right here in the front. That's the monarch or the larvae right there. Close-up filter. And then here it is from top view, close-up lens, close-up filter right here, extension tube right here. And then that's what you get with the micro crystal balls. So just playing around with that. So you're getting fairly high magnification, but it does make it a lot of fun. You can buy bellows. Once again, if you can take your lens off. So you can buy a bellows. This is super, super, super extreme if you're going to use bellows. This Photo DOX macro bellows, though, I show it to you because bellows used to cost a tremendous amount of money, and this little guy doesn't. And so I haven't tried it yet, but supposedly does a pretty good job. Comes with good recommendations. You're inside for this, but this might be gems and minerals, jewelry, things like that. So for your macro work. And then this is a Movo reversing ring with a 70-200 millimeter lens. So this is a little bit different also. And this allows you to turn your lens around. So you photograph through the back of the lens instead of the front of the lens. And this allows you to get even closer. Here it is, that monarch egg that I'm working on again with the Movo reversing rings. And here's a peacock feather. And this is what a Movo reversing ring looks like. Now, I bought all this because the lady on the YouTube video said this was absolutely amazing. And she was running all over her garden, photographing all kinds of stuff, super, super close up. So I bought the little bitty lens that she recommended and the whole Movo reversing thing because that little cord allows you to autofocus. And I will tell you, there is no running around the garden with this thing. I mean, maybe. But my running around the garden produced nunca. So it was for me, this wasn't a running around the garden photographing wildlife or photographing macro subjects. I found it incredibly frustrating. I did like it inside as a setup where I could use tripods and I could get everything stable and that type of thing. But as far as running around in the garden, I just would rather photograph butterflies with my lens versus this thing. But it is there just in case you see it. But let me show you what I did find out in the garden. This is a little video. Oops, yeah, here it goes.
Oh.
So those are thrips that live in a tiny little blue milkweed plant. No, go on. Yeah, there we go. These are thrips that live in a tiny blue milkweed bloom. And it's a very, very tiny, tiny bloom, but it's a species of milkweed. And not until I used that reversing MOVO ring did I see the little thrips that were living in there. So it was neat for that, but I was not hand holding this. This was tripod, trying to keep the lens as close to that flower as I could. But it was kind of interesting to see. Here's a pantry moth. This is the little moth that you would get from your bird seed that would fly around your house and get into your pantry if you're not careful. It's about 1/4 of an inch long. And then here's the interior of a bloom. But this gives you an idea of how close you have to get. And so you have to watch your shadow. And this is why I think for me, using the 24 millimeter that once again, the lady on the internet recommended, you get so close that you're casting a shadow on your subject. And then I just can't imagine a butterfly staying still for you getting this close. So for me, it just turned out to be a little bit impractical. The pictures were halfway decent, but it was a little bit impractical. I then put it on my 24 to 105. And this allowed me to get further away from the subject, zoom out, and now I could reverse it. So you see that it's reversed. This is the side of that usually goes on the camera, and this is the side that usually goes towards your subject. So your lens is backwards to increase the magnification. So this worked, but once again, it was all tripod work and interior work. So it gives you an extra little view. So it is out there. It is a possibility. It does pretty good on feathers and things like that. But as with all super close-up macro photography, I encourage you to think about whether the subject is worth photographing. So here I set the whole thing up, did the background, got a flat to the film plane, got close, got sharp focus, took the picture, probably took me a good 10 minutes just to get all that done. And then you realize, well, that's really not a very good picture anyway. So, you can work it. And then what you end up getting is not really worth it. The interior of a petunia, there's those macro beads again. And so, it ends up being a lot of work when you're doing super extreme macro like that. So you have to determine whether it really is worth playing with it or whether it is worth doing the photo. This is the very tiny crystal balls. And I think, yeah, this is a video just to show you the whole setup on this. So you see, I've got tweezers over on the side. I've got an LED light in the background to light it up. The lens is reversed. Here's what I'm photographing, those little tiny crystal balls. So it ends up being a fairly good amount of work to get it all working. But this again is the MOVO reversing rings. So it is out there. It is possible to do it. But it takes a little bit of work to get what I was looking for. So nearly impossible outside in this setup. I did kind of like it with the 24 to 105, but that was more interior work. So that is out there in case you're interested in it. And then we can go extreme. So this is the Nikon MPE 65 millimeter 1 to 5 times life size macro lens. I had always wanted to try this lens. My husband was going to write that article about that monarch egg, and I still didn't have the monarch photo that I wanted, or the photo I wanted to run in the Houston Chronicle of that egg. So it was during COVID. So I went ahead and I rented this lens. And I rented it online, got a phone call immediately from the company. And he said, I see you rented this lens. And I said, yeah, I'm going to use it. And he said, do you know how to use it? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, I just want to make sure you know what you're getting into. because when you zoom out to 5 times life size, there is no holding this lens.
Oh,
At 5 times life size, you are locked down on a tripod. So at 1:1, you see the barrel there. At 1:1, you might be able to handhold this because it's 65 millimeters. At 1:2, it's getting real dicey. 1:3, you're totally on tripod. 1:5, you're turning the air conditioner off in the house because it's shaking things and you're not walking on the floor. So at 1:5, my studio's upstairs, so I couldn't walk on the floor at 1:5. I had to turn off the air conditioning unit so that the house wouldn't shake and the subject wouldn't move. So at 1:5, you are not breathing on your subject because this is really, really intense macro photography. So life size on the Monarch egg, artificial background. So this is 1:1, 2 times life size, 3 times life size, 4 times life size, and finally 5 times life size. So once I got to 5 times life size, this was a couple of hours of work to even get to 5 times life size, to figure out how to, we've got to do all kinds of stuff, and this is 5 times life size. So it is absolutely beautiful, absolutely fascinating to work with, but also you've got to be very patient at 5 times life size. So fun. So that's the Canon. And this was kind of interesting. This is a Monarch egg that I found on the milkweed while I was playing. And by the way, look, here's another one of those thrips right there. So they're everywhere. And this is, I brought it into the house. So that means, now they're in the house. Yeah, I know Marty's like, and I was the same way. It was like, oh my gosh, but what I found fascinating was that this Monarch egg, when the Monarch larvae hatched, somehow it had strings attached on the outside, and some butterfly friends and I don't know whether those are attached after or before, because I never saw them attached in the whole time I was photographing them, but it's to hold it upright. And many larvae of butterflies and moths eat the entire egg as their first meal. The egg shell is their first meal because it has the nutrients in it. So it's just, cool stuff to find when you're looking around at something 5 times life size and you have nothing else to do with your life, because you're pretty committed once you're in there. Here's, I happen to have some butterfly specimens that I use in class. And so this one's been beat up a pretty good bit over the years, but you can see the eyes of this sulfur butterfly, 5 times life size. And then here's the Monarch larvae at life size. And you can see some egg cases hanging there and life size. So this is this is a clear lens. It's a nice lens to use. Once again, just pretty specialized type of lens. And this is life size on a little inchworm that I found. So I found that living subjects at life size are sometimes very difficult to photograph, especially something like an inchworm that's inching along. But then this is my newest play toy. I'm always playing, guys. So this is my newest play toy. And I like this one. This is a Laowa 25 millimeter, 2.5 life size to 5 times life size. And the neat thing about this is this costs $399. So this isn't an overly expensive lens to play with. This is the front of the lens. And here's where you set the f-stop right here. And then the back of the lens back here. But this whole lens is about so big. So it's pretty tiny little gadget. It goes with your mirrorless cameras or your digital SLRs. At five times, I would never go out in the garden with this unless I was on a tripod. But at 2.5 times life size, I might go out in the garden with it. And it's got pretty good quality to it. Marty, you know our friend Carlos in the camera club. So Carlos has been using the 2 times life size Laowa for a long time, and he gets really good results on it. But this is the 2 to 5 times macro. So the optics on it are pretty good, and especially when you consider the price. So I think it's a really nice little lens if you're looking to do 5 times life size. So this is what you can do with that lens. So I've got a blog posting about this. I swatted the moth to get, or the fly to get it out of the house, and then it was still live. So I figured, well, what the heck, photograph it. You couldn't photograph anything that was alive moving around because you'd never ever get it in focus by the time it was moving. So this guy was kind of mortally injured, so I could at least get him to stay still for a little while. But that gives you an idea of what you can do with this little Laowa lens. And I think it works pretty good. I've got a whole bunch of little subjects that I want to photograph at 5 times life size.
So you're saying it does fit on the macro, I mean, on the mirrorless cameras?
It does. You buy it for the mirrorless. So if you're a digital SLR, you buy it for your Nikon digital SLR or Canon digital SLR. If you're using mirrorless, then you buy it for your mirrorless, whichever brand of camera you're using. And at $399, I think it's it's a fun little thing to play with. Doesn't take up much room either. So interesting little lens to play with. So your reproduction ratios, again, just so that you can get those kind of back in your head, 1:1, same size life sizes on the sensor. If the subject's 1 inch, it's going to be 1 inch on the sensor. If you've got a full frame sensor, 2:1, twice as big as life size, 4:1, 4 times as big as life size. So just your reproduction ratios. Any questions about those lenses yet? Any of the lenses that I've talked about, or using any of the lenses that I've talked about? No, you're good on that? Just to give you an idea of equipment. Yeah. Okay, so Lynette, did you have a question?
No,
No, you're good? Okay.
thank you.
Now what you've got to realize is, now that you know I can do this with any of my lenses, and then there are specialty lenses out there that I can do. Now we have to deal with depth of field, because mathematically, if you do the math formula for depth of field, which we only do in a very advanced class that I have, so you don't need to really know the math on how to calculate depth of field. But the closer you get to your subject, the smaller your depth of field becomes. And you all have probably already found this out using your 105 macros or working in the field. The closer you get to your subject, the smaller your depth of field becomes. That's just the physics of it, of getting through glass and everything else. That's just the physics. So on this penny, you can see that I've got, let me move you all around for just a second so that I can see this. On this penny, you can see that I've got, a penny, I'm sorry, is 3/4 of an inch across. So a penny is 3/4 of an inch across. So we'll use that as a reference, trying to get the entire penny across in focus with your depth of field. But where are we? Oh, yeah. Oh, there's my f-stops over there on the side. They're behind something in my, there. So there we go. That's what I was looking for. I had to move some of this zoom stuff around. So at f22, that's all I can get. I can't get the full Abe Lincoln face in focus at f22. F8, that's all I can get in focus. F4, that's all I can get in focus. So when we're using our macro lenses, we're not going to shoot them at 2.8 if they have a 2.8, and we're not going to shoot them at 4 if they have a 4. So because the closer we get to our subjects, the narrower our depth of field becomes. That's just the physics of light. So we're going to play with this little bunny for a second. And at this is my 85 millimeter lens. At f4, I've got 2/10 of an inch in focus. And at f8, I've got 1/2 an inch in focus. Now, this is also what's called flat to the film plane. The camera is absolutely parallel to the little bunny, flat to the film plane, because our depth of field is absolutely parallel to the back of the camera. So if you tilt your camera, your depth of field tilts. If you tilt your camera, your depth of field tilts. So we keep our cameras in macro photography parallel to the subject to maximize our depth of field. So at f8, I get a whole 1/2 inch in focus at f8, not much. And if I shoot it at f22, I get a whole inch in focus. So as close as I can get to my subject, f22, I get 1 inch in focus. So at macro photography, as close as we can get, we really do not have much depth of field. Now, if we turn and going back, there's my 22, my f8, and my f4. So f4, we just had 2/10 of an inch. f8, we have 1/2 an inch. And f22, we have 1 inch. So not much depth of field at all, even at f22. Now, not flat to the film plane, where we're working with a subject that's not parallel to the back of the camera. This is when we're really going to notice how shallow our depth of fields are. So turning the subject just a little bit, and I moved to a 140 millimeter instead. So I was at 85 millimeter. So I'm also adding another variable to this, and this is that I'm adding more magnification. The more magnification you add, the shallower your depth of field. The closer you are, the shallower your depth of field. So adding more magnification makes my depth of field even shallower. So at 6.3, I get 3/10 of an inch with my 140. At f8, I get 1/2 an inch with my 140. And then at f45, because this lens will go to f45, then I get 2.5 inches. So I don't know about you, but I would never think of going out and doing macro photography at f45. You know, you would think that you wanted it, you would want some more light than that, but I can get a whole 2.5 inches at f45. So you can almost see the background back there. And then if I get lots of magnification, 560. So this is my 1 to 400 millimeter lens with a 1.4x extender on it. So this is 560 millimeters. At f8, I have 2/10 of an inch. That's it. So f8, 2/10 of an inch. And then if I take it to f45, because it has a 45th or an f45, I can get a whole 1 inch at 560 millimeters. Now, an interesting thing with some of our new mirrorless telephoto lenses, like my new 100 to 500 RF mirrorless lens, it only goes to f8. That's the smallest f-stop it'll go to. So when you first see that, you think, well, why would they do f8? I need 2.8. I need 4. No, you don't, because when you zoom all the way out to 500 millimeters, f8, you only have 2/10 of an inch anyway. So why in the heck do you need f4? That just makes your lens heavier, because at that magnification, that's how much depth of field you have. So when these new high magnification lenses from Canon and Nikon have come out at f4, all kinds of people were complaining about it. But if you do the depth of field, that's really all you need. If you do the math formula, that's all you need. And then it keeps the lens light, it keeps it inexpensive, and it allows us to handhold. So there's my whole 1 inch at f45, which means we got to have a lot of light. So this concept now of flat to the film plane comes into play, because our depth of field is so shallow that we've got to make sure that we've got the camera as parallel to the subject as possible so that our depth of field is not cutting through the subject. So here you see the larvae flat to the film plane, and here you see the monarch flat to the film plane. So keeping our macro subjects as parallel to the camera as we possibly can. The one over on the right-hand side, by the way, is done with textures. It has textures overlaid on it. And I know several of you all have taken my textures class. It's a master class too, where we learn to turn our photos into oil paintings, or looking like oil paintings or watercolors. It'll come up again if you're interested in it. So here's the bacillus lizard flat to the film plane, nose to fin on the back of the head, parallel to the camera, absolutely parallel to the camera. You were with me, Marty, when we did this one a long time ago. And when he turns his head not flat to the film plane, you see how nose is out of focus and fin is out of focus. So flat to the film plane, not flat to the film plane. So with our macro photography, we want to be as parallel to the subject as we possibly can. Flat to the film plane with the moth. So you see his wings. I'm trying to keep the camera as parallel to those wings as I possibly can. So using that magnification so that we can get all of the moth in focus, but trying to be flat to the film plane. We do this with our dragonflies out in the field. So I can't bring a dragonfly into the house. I can bring a moth and flowers and things into the house, but I can't bring a dragonfly in. So when we're out in the field trying to photograph our dragonflies, we have to keep the camera, the back of the camera, as parallel as we possibly can to that full body so that we can get tail all the way through to eyes and face in focus. Same thing with our golden orb spiders when we get those in August, you know, big old spider out in the garden. So parallel to the flat to the film plane, keeping the camera as flat as we possibly can. And then with those red-eyed tree frogs in Costa Rica, keeping the camera as flat as we possibly can to the film plane, keeping both eyes absolutely parallel to the back of the camera. Otherwise, one eye's in focus and one eye's out of focus. Same thing that I did with this one on the butterfly, the hummingbird feather, but I'm using as much depth of field as I can because I was able to bring it inside. It's placed on a mirror, by the way, with a black background. So I'm using black velvet background and then placing the feather on a mirror to do macro on that. You have on your cameras, on your digital SLRs, those of you using digital SLR, you have a little bitty button down on the side of the camera called a depth of field preview button. Mirrorless cameras, we can actually see our depth of field through the viewfinder. Everybody else using your digital SLRs, you all have a depth of field preview button. And what this means is you've got your camera on your tripod and you're looking at that little feather like I just showed you, then you could push that button and change your f-stop, and you could determine what f-stop you needed to use to get that feather in focus. So when you push that little button, it closes down the aperture for real. And then I always have to put my hand around the viewfinder to let my eye adjust to the darkness through the viewfinder. And then you can see how much depth of field you actually have. So do you do this at f45 or do you do this at f36 or do you do this at f24? So you can change your f-stop and you can see what your actual depth of field is. So that's called the depth of field preview button that'll help you when you're working on landscapes or macro photography. And then the last little thing that I've got for you is a focusing rail. So this is if you're doing some extreme macro photography, like if you were photographing gems and minerals, or if you were photographing jewelry, or if you were photographing monarch eggs or something like this. This is a focusing rail. You attach it to your tripod, and then you attach your camera to the top. These used to be very expensive. But this little guy right here, I think is $139. So it doesn't cost very much at all. And then you can focus forward and backward, and you can focus side to side. So when I'm doing the 5x life size, I'm rotating the focusing knobs on the rail and not on the camera. So I'm not touching the camera, I'm rotating on the rail. So instead of moving the tripod, I'm sure you've done that with macro photography before where you're moving the tripod. This allows you to move the camera slightly over and focusing further, closer, so you can move the camera around without having to actually touch the tripod legs. So it's called a focusing rail. Don't use it all the time, but it becomes a really neat gadget to be able to use. So it's a focusing rail. And once again, it doesn't cost very much money. This one, I think it comes, if you're interested, tell me, because I didn't put it on my handout, but next week I'll tell you what the name of the company is that does it, but it's about $139, so not very much. Okay, so questions so far before we get into homework? Y'all good?
So,
Okay. Okay. You don't have to buy all this stuff, remember. It's just throw it out there and show you what's available. So you don't have to buy everything. So your homework assignment, what you're going to do in this class, because it's a 4-week class, is you are going to photograph the assignment, and then you're going to upload those photographs to my Dropbox. And when I send you the recording of this class, I'll also send you a link to my Dropbox. So we'll get into that in just a second. So for your homework assignment, you're going to select 3 lenses, just 3 of your lenses. And Lexi, you've got that 1-piece unit, and I don't think it has interchangeable lenses. So I want you to select different focusing areas. So focus as close as you can, focus in the middle, and then zoom your lens out all the way. Everybody else, I want you to use 3 of your lenses. Focus as close as you can on a small object, flat to the film plane. So find yourself a little figurine or something like that, and find something that's got some flatness to it. So you could do a piece of jewelry if you wanted to, or you could do, if you found something outside like a flower that's flat, then you could use that, like a Gerber daisy, or you could go to the grocery store and get yourself a Gerber daisy, something like that. So small object, flat to the film plane, and I want your background to be 6 feet away. So we're going to see what kind of depth of field you get with that background 6 feet away. So actually do a measurement for me, make sure your background is 6 feet away. And then photograph with your widest aperture, 2.8, and then don't move, f8, don't move, f32, or whatever your smallest aperture is. Then I want you to take that lens off and put your next lens on, and do the same thing with your next lens. F8, or excuse me, f2.8, or whatever the widest aperture is, f4, 2.8, f8, f32. Take that lens off, same thing, change the lens, focus as close as you can. You might have to move back or forward when you change those lenses, and then photograph at your widest aperture, f4, f2.8, f8, f32. So 3 lenses, 3 shots with each lens in the same position, background 6 feet away, small object. And then I want you to use one of your lenses. I don't care which one you use. Focus on the same subject, but turn it so that it's not flat to the film plane, with your background still 6 feet away. And then use your widest aperture, your medium aperture, and then your smallest aperture. So if your widest aperture is 4.5, use that, then something in the middle, and then your smallest aperture. So you're going to take 9 photos at first, and then you're going to go not flat to the film plane, and you're going to do 3 photos. Okay, so you've got a total of 12 photos that you need to take. And then when you present them, go ahead and process them. So it's okay to process them. And I don't want you to crop them if you would. Just, it's okay if you ran over, if there's something showing in the background, don't crop them, please. And then process them as a JPEG. So if you're shooting in RAW, those of you shooting in RAW, then go ahead and make a JPEG for me. Resize your photo to 1280 on the longest side at 96 DPI. If you don't know how to do that, send me a note because I made a video to show you how to do it. And you can do this in either your Lightroom or your Photoshop or your Elements or whatever you're using. Resize your photo and then rename your photo if you would, and put your name first. Tell me what lens you were using, what f-stop you were using. Use my little example. So that'll help us keep it straight because we've got a whole 12 photos to show for everybody in the class. And then by 5 o'clock the day before class, if you would, so by 5 o'clock on Monday afternoon, upload them to my Dropbox. If you're running late, don't panic. It's okay. Tell me you're running late and you can go ahead and submit your photos up until, right before class if I can get them. If you have a Dropbox that you'd rather use, then just send a link to me. If you have a WeTransfer that you'd rather use, then just send the link to me and I'll go get the photos from you. So you don't have to use my Dropbox, but just in case. If all else fails, that's small enough to email me. So you could email me 4 or 5 photos at a time. So don't get hung up on not being able to get them up into the cloud. Whoa, 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 whoa. Go. And then I'll put the photos into the slideshow and we'll talk about them. And this is a great time for each person to ask questions of each other. Those of you who've been through masterclass before know what we're doing there. This is a good time for you to ask questions of what lens you were using or, that type of thing. This is a good time for you to express your frustration to everybody else. This is a good time. Children learn by getting frustrated. If you've ever watched a kid trying to get, that square peg in that round hole, they get frustrated. And so frustration is part of learning. So don't worry if it makes you frustrated. If it makes you frustrated and angry, then that's cool. That's the way we learn. So we get to share that frustration and everything else that goes along with it. Questions on homework?
I have a question just in general
Sure.
to differentiate between close-up and macro, because I love taking really detailed up close, but I don't know if it's considered macro or not. Is there a certain part of the picture?
Nope. It's, macro is close up. And so that's where I say you don't have to use a designated macro lens because I like photographing things really close too. I like trying to get as close as I can.
Mm-hmm.
In certain contests, so the Garden Club of America, for instance, says that you have to photograph things that are I think it's no more, somebody correct me if you know better, that's no more than an inch square.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what they consider close-up photography. That's their designation. So you have to start with a subject that was an inch long or an inch high. So it just depends on the designation. Yeah. But I think any close-up photography is macro photography.
Okay.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Kathy.
Yes, Lynette.
Yes. When I'm using my 24-105 lens, do I go to the 105 or 24 or I'm sorry.
So if you only have a couple of lenses, so you don't have a whole bag full of lenses to play with. If you want to do the 3 at 24 millimeters and do the 3 at 105 millimeters, if you want to, or you've got your 100 to 500, do the 3 at 24 millimeters on your 24 millimeter lens, and then do 3 at 100 on your 100 to 500 and do 3 at 500.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or can I even add the 500D to the front of my 24 or 105? Will that also work?
Hold off using the 500D right now. Use that on another
okay.
assignment. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Let's just do your lenses with no close-up filters or extension tubes if you have those right now.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things that, I just got back from Costa Rica, and one of the things that I have to do when we go in to photograph the frogs is I have to get everybody to understand what their minimum focusing distance is. And I think that's an important thing for each lens that you own, is understanding what your minimum focusing distance is, so that you kind of immediately know, oh, this lens focuses this close, or this lens focuses this close. How close can I actually get with this lens? Because every lens has got a minimum focusing distance.
Is that in the manual?
It's written on the barrel of the lens.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. It's actually written on the barrel of every lens. So you'll see, sometimes you see a little tulip symbol, and then it'll say 4.9 feet or 1.5 feet, and then the equivalent in meters. So most of the time it's written on the lens.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just good to know. And this is a good thing too on future purchases of lenses. How close do they focus? As I said, Canon has a real cheap 75 to 300 millimeter lens, but you have to be 4.9 feet away when you're at 300 millimeters. That's 5 feet away from the subject. No wonder it's a cheap lens, but some people don't know that when they buy it. So, these are things you learn as you go along, what your focusing distance are. Okay. So any other questions on homework assignment? As you're working on homework, if you've got questions, email me. I'm in all week long, and so I can get to you pretty fast. If you email me, just send me an email and I'll get it back to you as soon as possible. If I think the whole class can benefit to it, I'll send the whole class a note.
We do use the same item for all
Use-
of the pictures.
Use the same item for all of the pictures. Yes, yes, yes. So find yourself something that you like, because you're going to be working with it for a while. Yeah, so use the same item. And once again, it can be a Gerber daisy, nice flat flower you can buy at the grocery store. There's probably a lot of them today because it's Valentine's Day. Tomorrow, there's going to be a lot of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you can use anything that you would like that pleases you. And if you're more into gems and minerals, use gems and minerals. If you got a little vase you like, whatever, go for it. Just flat. You just want something that's pretty parallel, so you can see how much flat to the film plane you get.
Kathy,
Question? Yes.
as a reminder, I probably won't be here the next class.
Okay.
This is Sarah, because we'll be traveling.
Okay. No problem at all. No problem at all. And the same thing with everybody else. If you happen to miss a class, you get the recording, and then you can keep up on the homework. Okay, my friend. Thank you very much for joining me this morning. It's been fun. It's been good having you all. Remember, if you have any other questions as you're working, send them to me by email.
Thank you.
You
Thank
are
you.
welcome.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks so
Bye.
much.
Okay.
Bye.
I'll see you all next week. Okay.
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 See you on
Bye-bye.
Saturday.
See ya. Okay. Bye, guys.
Bye.